It's harvest time. And if you are anything like me and you're growing summer squash, you're gonna run into this problem. What do you do when your zucchini turns into a marrow? You know what, my chickens have had so much of this that they just won't eat it anymore. So what I do is I turn it into dehydrated zucchini that stores for at least a year, and I can use it for whatever I want to cook throughout the year. Just throw it into any food, essentially as a bulking agent, so you don't have to waste your overgrown summer squashes. This one's not even the worst that I get. And every year I tell myself, I'm gonna get them every second day, it's not gonna happen, but they hide, everything's green, and then you end up with, I don't know, this is like bigger than a toddler at this point. It's ridiculous. So let's work out how we can salvage this so you're not losing part of your harvest. If your summer squashes have got this big, you do need to do a bit of prep work to get them ready to go into the dehydrator. So what I do is I chop them up into pieces that I can manage, because it's gotten pretty big. And I take out the seeds from the middle. Now, I also dehydrate the smaller ones if I just have an overabundance and I've got them on time. And if I get them at a less mature point, I don't need to take the middle part out. They're fine just to grate up because the seeds are not mature yet and they just squish into the grater and it's fine. I haven't had any problems with that. But once they get this big, you want to take the insides out of them. So you're going to prep your pieces. It's a very simple process. And I throw these scraps to my chickens, but like I said, they've had so much of this, they're probably not going to eat it at this point. And I just use a basic grater. You could put it through a food processor, but I tend to do this in a hurry. I'm like, oh, I really have to deal with this. So I just grab my grater and get it done because the cleanup is much less than if I run it through the food processor. And this is gonna fit one full load in my little dehydrator here. So I don't want to do a huge amount of cleanup for something that I can only fit this much into my dehydrator. One day I'll have a bigger one or more than one, but right now I've just got this little Sunbeam Food Lab dehydrator and I really like it. So once you've got your grated piece, now you'll get used to how much will fit on each of your trays, and I tend to just grate that much at once and pop it into the dehydrator as I go along so I don't end up just with a mess everywhere. So what I like about this style of dehydrator is it's really easy to see the trays and you can put different things on the trays, and then if things need different amounts of time, you can manage that situation quite easily. Now with the grated summer squash, I just use some parchment paper, baking paper, and then I just load up onto there, and I haven't had any trouble with that. I mean, I was a little bit worried it wouldn't dry when I first started doing it this way, but it's been totally fine. You want to spread it out, not too thickly, so if you have it all on top of each other, it's not going to dry very well or fast. And we want, if you're anything like me, your dehydrator is almost in constant use at this time of year, so you really want to get things in and out of it nice and quickly. So that is all there is to dehydrating down your summer squash. I tend to run it at around 55, 60 degrees Celsius. It doesn't matter that much, it's gonna get dry, but that tends to be the temperature that works for lots of different things if I'm putting multiple different kinds of things in it at once. Now it's been a bumper year for me this year for tomatoes, so let's look at how you set it up to go into the dehydrator for the best drying results. I grow all sorts of different types of tomatoes, and that can be a bit challenging when you're trying to get a consistent product out of your dehydrator. So I'm going to show you how I deal with lots of different shapes and sizes of tomatoes to get a consistently good result. Now, I dehydrate tomatoes every year. This year I'm doing a lot because I have a lot and I just can't keep up with all of the canning and all the other things I'm doing. And the dehydrator just does its thing. I don't have to do much work to make it happen. Mostly I keep them as slices, but what I do recommend doing is drying them down all the way to very, very crispy for a few batches, and then whizzing them up into tomato powder, which makes it smaller to store and easy to use when you're making pasta sauces and stuff like that through the year. It's sort of a substitute for a tomato paste that you might buy at the supermarket. So most of my tomatoes are this shape. So what I do to deal with those is I cut off the bottom, and I don't use that piece. I feed it to the chickens. You can use those pieces, but they dehydrate differently. So if you're gonna use them, put them on a separate tray and just keep an eye on them because they're probably gonna take longer. You want to cut your slices consistently. Cut them thicker if you want to have the tomatoes for rehydrating them, like to put on pizza, or so you're kind of making sun-dried tomatoes. But if you're going to do them as tomato powder, you want to cut them quite thin so they dry fast, and because they're all going to be whizzed up, it doesn't matter if they're brittle coming out of the dehydrator. I also discard tops. And if the stalk of the tomato has gone really deep into the tomato itself, I will cut that little piece out and leave it in with a little ring there, but this one's okay. It's borderline, but it's okay. Now, if you're talking about a strange kind of tomato like this, it's the same process, but it can be a bit inconsistent as to what you're gonna find at the top, so I like to chop the top piece off to see what I'm dealing with. And here I've got a big stem piece in the tomato, so I'm going to cut that out as I get to it. So again, trying to make your slices consistent. Now I'm doing these as a thick cut. And this also lets you check to see if there's anything going wrong inside the tomato and cut that out before you get there. So what I'm gonna do is I'm probably just not gonna use this piece. Now, if you don't have a huge overabundance of tomatoes, you can cut around this piece here and still use it. But in my case, I don't have a tomato shortage, so I'm just gonna not use this piece because I know it's not gonna give me a consistent result. And then I can check my pieces here. They're all fine. I'm just taking out a little discolored piece that I found there. And then they're all good to go on the tray. And I also dehydrate my little guys. I tend to keep them on their own tray because they do behave a little differently from the big slices. What I do there is I take off the end and I take off the top. And then I tend to dehydrate them just like this. Now this one's quite thick, but it's also quite ripe, so I'm not sure. Oh look, there we go, I got it. So, little pieces like this. If you leave the ends on them, they don't dehydrate well at all. So you want to take off the top and you want to take off the bottom. Yeah, it creates quite a bit of waste, but you're getting a much better product. And if you want to go ahead and do these little pieces, you can, but I do not find it worth it to do that. So all you're going to do there is you're just going to spread them out on your tray, not touching. They can be close together, but you don't want them touching. And I, of course, always try to do a full load through my dehydrator. Now these little pieces, I would say put them on their own tray, but they're fine on a regular tray as well. You just might have to check if they're finished before or after your other pieces. you're just gonna stack it all up in your dehydrator and away it goes. And they can go at the same temperature as that summer squash that I've already done. So once I get this all filled up, it can just go on and do its thing. But I will check because the zucchini is gonna finish before the tomatoes do. So I just keep an eye on it as it's doing its thing. That is how I deal with the overabundance of the main things that I have in excess every year. The dehydrated zucchini, summer squash, and the dehydrated tomatoes. I use this way more than I thought I would when I first started to give it a go. I use it in making burgers, you can use it in meatloaf, you can use it in pasta sauces, my spaghetti sauce, I throw it in there. It just kind of dissolves into nothingness. You can't pick it up once it's in the food, so it's a great way to get vegetables into kids, and it's just great. I love it. Use it all the time. I'd highly recommend doing that for yourself. And the tomatoes, we use them mostly on pizza through the winter time where we can enjoy a lovely taste of summer. I rehydrate them and then pop them onto the pizza and they're so delicious. But also I grind them into powder and then use that powder instead of tomato paste when I'm making spaghetti sauce or any kind of tomato-based like liquid type dish. They're fantastic. The powder makes it much, much easier to store large amounts of tomatoes if you are running short on space, which I always do as well. It's just crazy, crazy time when everything's coming out of the garden and I'm trying to store it for the winter time.